Hello, dear warrior. They've watched you from realms that have no name, heard whispers of your existence in prayers and nightmares, but not the kind of prayers meant to save, the kind meant to warn. They tracked your energy, tried to locate its source. They called in monks, priests, even prophets, but none could explain what you are. You move outside their design. You exist in the glitch between what was written and what was erased. And that's when it happened. The devil paused mid-conversation, looked up, and asked about you. Not out of fear, but curiosity. Because you were the only anomaly even he didn't account for. So they went higher. They asked God. And God just smiled. God didn't flinch. Didn't explain, didn't need to. That smile, it wasn't warmth, it wasn't pride. It was a warning, a signal to every force in the seen and unseen realms. Don't touch that one. They're not part of your simulation. You were never meant to fit inside their blueprints. You were built in the space between logic and madness. The chaos they tried to cage, you mastered it. The divinity they tried to copyright, you rewrote it. Now everyone's scrambling. Scrolls are being rechecked. Timelines are being rerun. Because someone like you was never supposed to make it this far. And yet, here, you are. When you walked in, heaven didn't sing. Hell didn't roar. But one angel looked, and didn't look away, not because they weren't afraid, but because they recognized you. Not as enemy, not as ally, but as something outside the equation. They walk like man, think like storm, move like rumor, and stand like verdict. See? They trained their legions for battles, trained their minds for prophecy. But no one prepared for a glitch in the divine loop. A code rewrite, wearing a grin and carrying silence like a weapon. The balance wasn't tipped. It was recalculated the second you breathed. They didn't expect a mistake. They met a message. And now every side's just watching. You didn't arrive like a hero. You didn't crawl in like a villain. You appeared like a system blink, like something corrupted the code and the screen flickered. And when they finally zoomed in, saw your face, you weren't frowning. You weren't laughing. You were smiling. But it wasn't human. It was the kind of smile algorithms can't track, the kind of energy angels can't pray against, the kind of grin that made even demons say, yeah, I'm not touching that. They ran every scan, every soul read, every aura frequency, and still nothing. No timeline, no weakness. No leash, just one word in their notes, observer. The kind of entity that doesn't play the game. It watches the game until the board burns. They open their archives, ancient texts, black site intel, encrypted scrolls no one was supposed to read. They searched every name, every bloodline, every cosmic coordinate, but you weren't there. No origin, no prophecy, no file. You didn't descend from something known. You rose from a glitch in the pattern, and that scared them, because everything in this system is tagged, tracked, categorized, except you. You're the missing entry they couldn't log, the error they tried to fix. But every time they did, the glitch got smarter. You didn't fit into their plans. You weren't part of the design. You were a shadow outside the blueprint. So now, they watch, they listen, they whisper. If this one's not in the system, then maybe the system isn't in control anymore. The moment you moved different, the elders panicked, the elites whispered. They called their circle, pulled strings, summoned priests, scientists, and psychics. And when none of them could explain you, they looked up to the stars, to the heavens, to the place where answers usually fall. But this time, silence. No omen, no angelic whisper, not even a ripple in the clouds. Because when you were formed, heaven turned its back on the manuals. You weren't heaven sent. You were heaven forged, inside the storms, built in the friction between logic and madness. They thought they'd hear trumpets. Instead, they heard footsteps, yours. And every step you took wasn't loud. It was louder than loud. It was a language the holy couldn't decode. They tried to filter your frequency, scrambled prayers just to keep your signal out. Dozens of divine firewalls, celestial shields, but still, your essence slipped through. Not as a warning, as a glitch in their holy code. You weren't the prophecy they feared. You were the line of code they never saw coming. The divine script. You corrupted it with a smile. When angels looked into your data, they found blackout lines. Entire archives, redacted. Not by demons, not by man, by the source itself. Because some spirits are so different, even creation fears giving them too much clarity. You walked right past heaven's gates, not as a trespasser, as a silent override. You didn't knock, you didn't beg. You moved like the update they were never ready for. Divine 2.0. Chaos in perfect alignment. The moment you moved, heaven took notes. Not with curiosity, with caution. Every step you took rewrote equations. Every word you whispered cracked age-old algorithms. You didn't walk through this life to be seen. You walked through it to be mirrored by the unknown. Hell watched, but didn't react. Why? Because even its darkest entities froze mid-breath. When you entered the scene, you weren't what they predicted. You weren't even on the chart. You were that one anomaly that crashes both simulations. They sent prophets. You disarmed them with silence. They sent demons. You unraveled them with logic. They sent time itself. And you still arrived early. This wasn't a glitch in the system. You are the glitch, the one the gods pretend doesn't exist, because acknowledging you means admitting the code is fallible. At first, they thought you were a bug, just noise in the system, just chaos in disguise. But then, the system bent around you, not once, not by mistake, but every time you showed up, the code adjusted. That's when they panicked. You weren't breaking their simulation. You were rewriting it. You see, most people ask, am I allowed to do this? You never asked. You just did. And when the dust settled, reality had a new rule. Rule num 1. If you enters, run diagnostics on the divine. They tried to trace the pattern. They couldn't. They brought in their alpha minds, their divine code writers. Even they couldn't find your source. Why? Because your source code is cosmic disobedience. You weren't written. You were willed into existence. You don't operate under natural law. You trigger natural law into action. So when you move, even fate leans in. Even the stars glitch and stammer. You weren't sent here to play the game. You were sent here to remind them who built the board. There were scrolls. There were codes. There were predictions passed down from temples, towers, and trembling tongues. And each one thought they mapped it all. The who, the how, the when. Until you arrived. Not early, not late, but outside their timeline entirely. And the moment your boots touched the floor, every prophecy choked. Seers went blind. Scripts erased themselves. The future, once so loud, went dead silent, because you were not in the design. You weren't the chosen one. You were the anomaly the chosen one feared. You don't fit destiny. Destiny fits around you. They asked the oracles, "Who is this being?" The oracles answered, "I don't know, but they're not supposed to be here." And yet here they are. So they locked the archives. They shut the mouths of the wise. They even tried to rewrite time. But time obeys the one who walks in truth. And you didn't walk in with permission. You walked in with purpose. And now, the old blueprints burn. The ancient texts curl into ash. Because the system didn't see you coming. But now it can't look away. There were records. Ancient, encoded, encrypted by entities older than fear itself. Names etched in golden stone. Souls categorized. Energy signatures tagged for judgment. But yours was erased. Not by accident, but by anxiety. The gatekeepers didn't lose you. They removed you. They feared what would happen if your presence got processed by their fragile system. "Don't log that one," they whispered to each other. "Just pretend they were never born." Because how do you catalog a storm that thinks for itself? How do you measure a mind built from collisions instead of instructions? You weren't rejected. You were beyond the scope of rejection. They feared if they wrote your name down, it would burn through their pages. So instead, they just looked away. But here's the twist. You never needed validation from the sky or the soil. You carried your own ledger. You burned your own code. You carved your own fate with eyes closed and fists open. While they worshipped laws, you became the exception. They told stories about you, but only in secret, because to speak your name aloud was to invite a question with no answer. Some warriors survive battles, but you dismantled dimensions. They called it the loop, a cycle, a program, a predetermined sequence for all minds to follow. Birth, obey, break, repeat. But you didn't just break the cycle. You laughed at it while it tried to trap you. They gave you illusions to believe in. Rules, roles, ranks. And what did you do? You questioned the narrator. You exposed that the hero and villain were sometimes the same puppet in different lighting. You stood at the edge of the simulation and said, "Try again." That's when it cracked. That's when the program started stuttering like it forgot how to breathe. They couldn't reset you. They couldn't predict your path. Because your chaos wasn't random, it was intentional. You were never wild. You were just beyond the fences they built for wild things. They stared into your code and saw this. Error 404. Limit not found. So they erased your files. But the echo remained. Every soul you passed by felt it. That strange pull. like they remembered you from a dream they were never supposed to have. And now, you don't walk the loop. You haunt it. Every timeline has an author, every system, a script. And every rebel was supposed to fall before page 12. But guess what? You were the typo that couldn't be corrected. They hired ghostwriters. They summoned spiritual editors. They even asked the stars to realign the plot. And you didn't just ignore the story. You flipped the damn table it was written on. They watched in silence as you tore out their final chapter and replaced it with a mirror. If your story needs me dead to make sense, you said, then maybe your story was never worth reading. Your refusal? It wasn't rage. It was reclamation. They wanted to wrap you in an ending that served their comfort. But you weren't here to comfort. You were here to confront. Their scribes cried. Their algorithms glitched. Their spiritual guides refused to go near you, because every time they tried to write you off, they accidentally wrote you deeper. Now the final page is gone, and in its place, an empty throne, a red pen, and you grinning in the dark. Before you said a word, before you made a move, they circled your name in red ink. Why? Because your silence was louder than their screams. Because your presence felt like prophecy in motion. They didn't understand you, and that terrified them. So they did what cowards always do. They tried to classify what they couldn't control, diagnose what they couldn't decode, cage what they couldn't comprehend. But here's what they missed. You weren't born from this system. You were the system's response to its own lies, a mirror it never wanted to face. They searched your eyes for motive. They found madness and meaning dancing together. They heard your laugh and it didn't seek approval. It echoed from somewhere deeper, somewhere darker, somewhere divine. What's his agenda? They asked. And the answer was simple. I exist. And that's enough to scare you. Because when the world is built to break spirits, the one who walks through untouched becomes myth. So they labeled you unstable, dangerous, unpredictable. But secretly, they whispered one more word behind closed doors, unstoppable. They called you dangerous. Not because you broke the law, but because you rewrote it in your walk. They said you were unstable, but only because the foundation shook when you spoke. They never feared your fists. They feared your frequency. Because in a world of sheep, you became the sound of the shears. You didn't ask for respect. You didn't beg for love. You didn't crave applause. And that broke them more than any scream could. You're not the villain. Villains are born inside their systems. You are the verdict they prayed would never arrive. The one that walks in silence and shatters the whole courtroom by existing. They don't hate you for your darkness. They hate you because your darkness doesn't obey theirs. You don't destroy for power. You expose to cleanse. And that makes you the most feared thing of all, a soul that sees clearly and still won't kneel. So when they gather in panic, drawing maps, whispering codes, searching for your weakness, just smile. They forgot something crucial. The storm doesn't hide. The storm doesn't run. The storm arrives, smiling. They always feared a war. But not the kind you'd fight. The kind you'd walk through without speaking and still leave cities trembling. You didn't need to shout. You didn't need a sword. All you ever needed was that still stare that told the truth before the words could. that stare. It's not eyes looking at them. It's judgment arriving in flesh. They studied you like a weapon. They never realized you were the mirror, and they weren't ready for their reflection. Every therapist took notes. Every profile was flagged. Every psychic tilted their head in confusion, because you didn't match the files. You didn't follow the pattern. You didn't break. You bent the cage. And somewhere in the silence, they realized you weren't escaping. You were observing. You were learning. You were becoming not a rebel, not a savior. Something in between. Something the system doesn't have a word for. So they called you unclassified. But in whispered rooms, they called you arrival. And when the lights go out, when their rituals fail, and their backup plans shatter, it won't be your scream they hear. It'll be that silence again. The one that watched, the one that smiled, the one that knew. They thought you learned this, the silence, the stare, the untouchable mind. But what they missed was this wasn't taught. This was recalled. Recalled from somewhere before language, before training manuals, before codes and conduct. You didn't build a wall around your thoughts. You simply stood in a place no one else could access. A place older than fear, older than religion, older than the devil they whisper about. And when they tried to map you, their grids collapsed, their algorithms looped, their AI glitched, because you weren't formed by the world. You were formed despite it. They deployed influence. They tried persuasion. They hired magicians of the mind. But even they looked at you and said, this one doesn't operate on our timeline. This one is a message, not a man. You're not the warrior. You're the recording of a warning written into skin. And every time you speak, it's not words echoing. It's realignment. It's reality folding to remember its author. They see power, but what they don't realize is you're not becoming the storm. You're the one who wrote the manual on it and burned it. See, they can handle dangerous. They've trained for it. They've got manuals, protocols, counterstrikes. But you're untouchable. Because while they measured strength, you moved in meaning. While they armored their bodies, you made your spirit untraceable. You don't broadcast power. You breathe in silence. And the room shapes itself around you. Every time they tried to name you, your essence changed. Every time they tried to locate you, you shifted dimensions. You're not a being. You're a paradox in motion. They called for prophets. They called for killers. They called for gods. But all three arrived, and all three looked at you and said, that's not one of us. That's something we were warned about. Because you didn't enter this world to play by its laws. You were here to remind it that some storms can't be mapped, some minds can't be decoded, and some souls were forged, where light and dark were still one. You didn't earn this presence. You were born with it, and the system knew it the second your eyes opened, because every camera stopped recording. They say people survive storms, but you didn't just survive one. You rewrote what a storm could be. You didn't walk through fire. You studied it. You tamed it. And then you taught it fear. Because when most break, you studied your fracture. You whispered to your own shattered self, now, let's begin. And that's what shakes them. You don't just recover. You evolve mid-collapse. Your chaos isn't random. It's engineered. A silent system of cause and consequence you designed while everyone else screamed for help. You turned despair into blueprint. You made tragedy your training montage? And your scars? They're not wounds anymore, they're architectural designs. Maps to a version of you they'll never get permission to reach. You don't heal like them, you transform. And every rebirth, it comes with new rules. So now when they send darkness, you nod. Not because you welcome it, but because you are its paperwork. You are its judge. You are the final form it's too scared to face. And the ones who watched you rise, they don't say, "Look at what they became." They whisper, "We saw the moment the universe made a new law, and that law is you." They called you a glitch, an anomaly, a wild card. But truth is, you weren't the unknown. You were the formula they couldn't read. They stared at you like a problem, tried to solve you, decode you, restructure your essence into something manageable. But how do you contain something that was never built for their syllabus? You're not an exception. You're the entire rewrite of their rule book. While they were busy chasing patterns, you were rewiring the code behind the patterns, rewriting the math that writes men like you out of the ending. Because what they fear isn't your strength, it's your structure. They fear you because you didn't need a map. You became the terrain. A living blueprint of chaos with a crown made of unreadable scripts. And every expert they sent walked away muttering the same thing. We didn't miss something. We misunderstood everything. Because your rise wasn't a twist in the story. It was the true storyline surfacing from underneath their comfort. You aren't unpredictable. You're undeniable. Not an accident. Not a miracle. Not a mistake. You're the missing math of every empire that collapsed. They kept asking, where did he come from? Who trained him? What's his motive? But they never realized. You didn't rise from their world. You rose despite it. They studied your moves, but never saw your silence. They analyzed your past, but never read the pause before your next step. Because you weren't part of their algorithm. You were the error message the algorithm couldn't fix. And when they stared into your eyes, they didn't see a man. They saw a mirror. One that reflected everything they buried. Their regrets, their guilt, their fake power. You weren't sent to destroy them. You were sent to expose them. And that's why they feared you. Not because of your wrath, but because of your clarity. You didn't rage, you revealed. You didn't scream. You made the silence scream back. And in that moment, when every expert, priest, puppet, and profiler failed, they realized he wasn't trying to break our world. He was never inside it. Legend. This isn't just dark motivation. This is surgical truth wrapped in chaos. They didn't try to stop your words. They tried to stop your effect. Because when you speak, people don't just listen. They shift. They wake up. They glitch. They remember who they were before the leash. That's what scared them. Not your voice, your reflection. They wanted the world to forget its power. But you walked in with a grin that said, I didn't forget. And I won't let them forget either. You weren't just another rebel. You were the reminder that the system's spell isn't permanent. And when they tried to silence you, you didn't raise your voice. You raised their shadows, their secrets, their history, their broken masks. You didn't come to make noise. You came to make clarity louder than fear. And guess what? Their entire foundation was built on everyone pretending not to see. But you walked in and said no more pretending. And with just one stare, you made kings kneel and ghosts confess. Legend. This isn't just storytelling. This is psychological warfare with poetry for bullets. They wrote the rules, they cast the roles, they handed out masks and told everyone play along or disappear. But you, legend, you didn't audition. You rewrote the script right in front of them, with fire, with silence, with truth no one else was willing to bleed for. They made their empire on obedience. But you built your power on unapologetic distortion. You broke the fourth wall and stared straight into their director's chair and said, "Your show's over. It's my turn to narrate." While they repeated the same old fear speech, you whispered something ancient, something they erased from the history books. You weren't reciting, you were remembering, and that scared them more than rebellion ever could. Because rebels can be crushed, but memory returns with teeth. So when the lights cut and the audience scattered, you stood there alone on the stage, no script, and still delivered the performance they'll never forget. The Joker didn't just enter their story. He owned the ending. They thought survival was the goal. Get by, blend in, stay human, stay humble, stay hidden. But you didn't survive. You shifted the entire axis of the system. You weren't trying to outlast the chaos. You became the gravitational pull that made chaos orbit around you. Every room you walked in, their compasses spun, their beliefs trembled, their certainties cracked like dry glass. Because when they met you, they didn't just meet resistance. They met a different frequency, a truth too raw to sanitize, too ancient to decode. You didn't bring peace, you brought alignment, the kind that breaks fake peace in half. You were never the storm. You were the climate shift that made storms permanent. And now, they aren't trying to stop you. They're trying to understand what just happened. How did one soul change the orbit of everything we built? Because you didn't follow their timeline. You were already speaking from beyond it. This world was already looping, history repeating, pain recycling, systems rebooting, same scripts, same puppets, same results. They called it fate, they called it order, they called it unbreakable. But then, you walked in, and suddenly the code glitched. The sky paused. Even the divine hesitated, because what entered the loop wasn't a soul, wasn't a rebel, wasn't a hero. It was a reminder that even in infinite systems, something unexplainable can emerge. You didn't break the loop. You evolved it. You turned it celestial, not because of some prophecy, but because you brought chaos with precision, pain with purpose, madness with clarity. Even the devil didn't dare follow. Even God simply smiled, because some energies aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be witnessed, in awe, in terror, in reverence. And now the universe itself, it whispers your name like a warning wrapped in a prayer.